welcome. We are here with the Next Gen GTM podcast, where we are gathering as many experts as we can find that have been in the go-to-market space for a long, long time, that are in it right now, and that are looking at all the ways innovation is changing what we're doing and ways that it's not, the things that we want to keep the same. And so today we have Kate Campbell. She's the Vice President of Marketing Communications for York IE. And she has helped countless companies really hone and finesse their go-to-market motions. And she is also a podcast host for the Don't Be a SaaS podcast, where she has a ton of topics. So we are thrilled to have her today. It is sure to be a fun time with some good thoughts, right, from Kate. You got thoughts. So welcome, Kate. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Thank you so much, Maddie. Great to be here. I oversee the marketing practice at York IE. We are a strategic investment firm. So not only are we investing in startups, we have an entire advisory services practice to help startups grow. I get the pleasure of working with startups as they start their messaging, as they start their marketing programs, and really be able to implement something we call Drumbeat marketing.
That is awesome. And you mentioned that a little bit, right? So Drumbeat marketing. So tell me more, what is that?
Yes, it is a philosophy, a go-to-market strategy, we like to say, and it's really for early stage startups who are having some difficulty in articulating their messaging and positioning. And what we try to tell them is like, get your messaging, make it really strong, have a unique point of view. And then it's all about discipline and consistency and getting out there until you're saying it until you're blue in the face, because that's when it really starts to resonate with your audience, because you just need to keep repeating it.
Okay, so you're really trying to focus on, there's an end-to-end customer journey, and we're going to create a drumbeat around that journey. Sounds pretty straightforward to me, but I'm sure it is pretty challenging. Can you talk a little bit about the biggest challenges that you see folks facing when they start to say, okay, we're going to get communication out to people, we're going to start the go-to-market motion right at the top of the funnel? Like, what are the challenges you're seeing there?
Yes, great question, because I think there's three main ones, and one of it has to do with like having difficulty in articulating exactly your messaging, your positioning. Like, who are you? What do you want to be known for? And like, it's so easy to chase the shiny object, but you have to be known for something. If you're known for everything, then you're actually known for nothing. So really being able to own your messaging, make sure that it's everywhere, make sure you're consistent about it, but then also be able to reach your audience. And that's a challenge, is your audiences are everywhere, and there's pressure to create leads and like put them through the funnel, but where do you start? And it's being able to create programs that reach that audience where they live. And also, brand building is hard. That's the last challenge. It's all about consistency. You need to build it. You need to be a thought leadership. Marketing, I always used to say, is like, you can't do it on a Friday afternoon when you realize, like, as a founder or early startup, you've done everything else. Oh, maybe I'll do marketing. It has to be part of your daily day. So that's part of like creating programs that are easy and thoughtful and help create that like consistency and that discipline that's needed. That way you create your brand and your brand building every day.
Brand building every day. I love it. As a seasoned brand builder, it's like music to my ears. Okay, so as we break that down even further, so the challenges you see in that, right, is you mentioned brand positioning. What's hard about that, right? You mentioned a little bit about like, we get bubbles in this podcast.
We get bubbles in this.
You mentioned a little bit about, if you're everything, you're nothing. I think we talked about that as, half the world likes hot tea, half the world likes cold tea, but ain't nobody like warm tea. So tell me a little bit about where you see brands getting into that warm tea space.
Oh, this is a great question. I think it's when you're trying to be everything and you're not really looking at how you're different, how you have a unique point of view, like what makes the cold tea, what makes people want an iced tea versus what makes people want a hot tea. And it's because you understand your customer pain points or your customer wants, and like understanding where your product fits and like why it matters, and then starting to build content around that. Like, here's the pain point and here's why our solution, or here's how we fix the problem, that's really, answers those customer questions, and it gets you out of being in the middle. You can't be everything. So you need to be focused on what you want to say, who you want to say it to, and how, and like why you're different. Like everyone right now is an AI startup. You have to explain exactly why you're different than the person coming in the door behind you.
Makes sense. And where have you seen that done well? Like take AI as an example. Like have you seen any areas where you've seen, people not doing it well and not differentiating in the AI space, or areas where you're like, man, I saw that and I feel like that's a great example that people can look to?
I actually think it's an industry shift of instead of naming like the top 10 startups, you're seeing that you're looking to buy from people. So you're starting to follow people who have a similar background to you and seeing what they're using, being able to leverage some of the tools that they're highlighting. And like at the end of the day, people want to buy from people, not necessarily like all these, anonymous like emails that are coming to you or these targeted paid. They want to buy from people. So I'm constantly stressing that as much as you're doing all of this content, you're building out all your systems, you also need to build out that personal brand and that thought leadership so that like it's okay for your startup to be synonymous with your personality if you're the founder or the CEO.
Interesting. So we have the brand positioning. It sounds like we have the positioning of the folks that are representing the brand. And then we have this idea, right? People buy from people. But you've also mentioned to me like scale is kind of important. So
you're going fast,
right?
You're going fast into the funnel. At some point, you do cross over from being founder-led sales and that personality to scale. And how do you do scale? Like, how do you take a marketing program at scale? Like, what does that mean? How does it all go so that everyone's pointing the same ship? And I honestly sometimes think it comes down to messaging and making sure that everyone's saying the same thing. As you get bigger, the sales team wants sales enablement that might be different than what the messaging is. How do you make sure that like every customer touch point, they're really knowing that this company stands for this? And that's really being consistent across the board.
And how do you, when you look at that, how do you ensure that consistency? Like what are maybe some playbooks you use or tools that you use that you can say like, this is how we make sure that what's happening on the marketing side is really translating all the way through?
Yeah, we actually, we're trying to capture that and help startups scale. So we actually have an entire set of playbooks on our Fuel template that we're trying. Like as you go, you want to make sure that as you're building, you're creating those playbooks and you're able to like share that. So that's we can drop the comment in the links. It's Fuel. It's our platform that we kind of go back to both for investment standpoint and as well as our advisory services to make sure that like, even though we're doing it for one client, we're also like enabling it for others. And I think a lot of it is just being able to make sure that your program is set up from the beginning, very thoughtfully, strategic, and also like consistent and agreed upon from everyone.
Very cool. And we've seen, because I know we chatted a little bit and you have talked a lot about, okay, so we have this idea. It needs to be a drumbeat. It needs to represent the brand and the people that represent the brand. And people want to buy from people. But we have to set up systems that allow us to get that operating in the right way. So, a lot of this podcast is about, right, your stack. Like, what are the things that you're using? What are the tools that you're seeing? And I think a lot of those go-to-market stacks are changing, but some of the things are the same. When you think about like the tried and true things people need to have in their systems, what comes to mind for you?
It's honestly taking a step back and seeing what you have and being able to, if you're going to say, if you're going to implement Drumbeat, for example, making sure that you have your own channel. So if you're using HubSpot or whatever it is that ties back into the other parts of it. I'm a big HubSpot fan. I do think that like you can put programs on there, but it's making sure it's all tied together to show you the results. Like the days of just putting up a blog post and counting that as impressions is not going to cut it anymore. You need to make sure everything is working together. You're owned, you're earned, you're paid, your systems, and it's all saying the same thing. So that way you're actually able to take data and tell the story of what's working and what's not. And that goes into having systems that you're able to test and you're able to experiment with. And as you scale, like we just talked about, you're able to like see some results quicker.
And where do you see startups like it sounds like you mentioned HubSpot. CRM is like one of your, it sounds like that's a core. Where do you get started with that? Like where are teams, do you see everyone has them and they're underutilizing them? Do you see not enough people are utilizing them? Like even in your own motion, like what is your perfect setup in that CRM?
It's all of the above. Like people are underusing it. I feel it is hard to keep up with all the changes. So you really need to be able to have someone who understands it. And also like you can have all the tools in the world. If you don't know what you're doing or you don't have a strategy or you don't have a business goal, it doesn't matter because like tools are just going to be noise that distracts you from that. Like what are you trying to set out for? Like we work with startups and it's definitely our corporate strategy and our financial practice that sits back and like, what are your goals for the business? How are you going to map that? How are you going to do it in a year? How are you going to break it into quarters? How are you going to do it every day? Like knowing what you're doing and everyone being like rowing in the same row will help the entire ship go up.
I love that point, right? Of, you kind of mentioned if you don't have your strategic playbook,
yes,
right? Going and wiring, a website lead capture into a clay table, into and having these crazy flows, like it's not maybe gonna do as much until you're using those playbooks and those tools to execute on that strategy.
And it has to be a playbook that works for you. And like we talked a lot about the Frankenstack and all the different CRM systems in there and how to clean it and like having teams on different systems and no one reporting up. Like you need to make sure that you kind of take that step back and figure out what's best for the company and at what stage you're at, and then set in all the processes and then set in all of the things that you might need to make sure that you're able to scale, to make sure that you're able to accelerate to those goals.
Okay, so you mentioned Frankenstack. I love that term. What does that mean and where have you seen that?
So it's with the rise of all these tools and free trials and like teams growing quickly, it's basically all of the different programs that you have that kind of create this like stack of tech that's not working together. Like in my DevOps days, I saw it a lot because you would bring it in. Now I'm seeing it when I'm really looking at all the different marketing tech that's out there. And I do it myself where even with the podcast, we're already, and we're only like 6 months in, we're already like, oh, let's do this, let's do that. And I'm like, how about we just take it back a minute and like get our messaging down. So like it is so easy to chase that shiny like new tool that might help you, but does it fit into what I'm trying to achieve? Like it's all about, especially in the past couple of quarters, just streamlining efficiency and being able to pick what works best, not necessarily something that might not work with your systems.
Totally. It's so funny when we were building out, our AI and folks were like, well, we need to see the results. We were like, great. Do you want a dashboard? They were like, no, the last thing in the world we want, right, is another dashboard. What we want you to do is put that information into the dashboards we're already using. So I definitely see that as a theme, right? People are looking not for Frankenstacks, but they're looking for seamless, execution. The challenge there, right, is different tech is good at different things. So I think the industry task, especially for builders, is to start to figure out how do we more seamlessly pass the ball and make it easier,
Exactly. And depending where you're at, HubSpot might be too expensive for you, but HubSpot might be too not like, I mean, they are competing great with Salesforce, but it also, you have to take a step back and look at like, what do I need today versus like long-term, I might need a Salesforce, but really like understanding and also like making sure the data is clean to start with. Because otherwise, the thing about a Frankenstack is you're going to have a data mess to clean up with later. And that's only going to add to some of the complexity you have and some of the mess. But if you start clean to begin with and put up those tracking mechanisms, depending on what you're using, make sure like you're capturing everything correctly, you won't have that mess later on.
And what are the top 3 tracking tools that people should be like, never walk out the door without your shoes on? Without what tracking tool?
So from a marketing perspective, and again, like my background is definitely content and all of that, I really do think you need to make sure you have your website even set up correctly to track, like having your Google Analytics, when you're running a campaign, having UTM codes or having all that campaign like identified, not just like leaving it in there, being able, I think before anything, before tracking, having a baseline of where everything's at today.
It's funny. The baseline is such, it's one that I feel like people always forget, right? You're so excited. You're like, we're going to go do something and we're going to launch it. And then things happen and you're like, great. What was the lift or what was, and then you're like, well, I don't know what it was before we launched it. And
and that's why it's good to look at the operations that you have and make sure they're designed for you to like accelerate growth and make sure that like you understand the people you have, the processes you have, the tech you have, and really set that up as you're doing your strategy. Otherwise it is going to be everyone grabbing what they want, that, their favorite 3 tools might not be the best 3 tools that actually fit for the business today.
Right. So I feel like that's a theme, right? It's that it's not one size fits all and you don't just go after, the cool ones. Like you got to go after like, this is what I'm trying to do. And so I'm going to bring in a tool that's going to do that. Because I know, because of the strategy that I know in the playbook that works, if I can line up my tech with the playbooks that I've tested in small, simple scale, then that's when I get the leverage and the amplification, right? But a great shiny tech stack isn't going to save you from, a value prop that doesn't resonate with your customers.
Exactly. And I think that's the one benefit that I'm sure with your background, you got to do this all the time, but like we need to do it at a smaller scale, is like test before you like feed it out there, make sure it resonates, like keep testing before you go and you launch this huge thing and it's like flat because you didn't do the testing, you didn't get the customer feedback. And that can be organic, that can be talking to peers, that can be, okay, we're going to focus on a thought leadership program, our key indicators are going to be the engagement of like those posts. If we're seeing traction, if we're seeing some of the key terms we want to come up, like you can test small before you go and you go all in on something.
Very cool. Now, okay, so you've walked me through, hey, we've got to get our brand positioning and our brand voice. You've walked me through kind of that mid-step of we need systems that execute our strategic playbook. So we're going to line our tech up to our strategic playbook that's going to work, these different marketing channels and leads into kind of a position to raise their hand or make a decision or have interest. What happens next? And where do you see folks having a challenge with that? Right? Is it just they show up and then they buy the product and then that's it? Or where do you see it going next?
Even before positioning and messaging, is like, what are you trying to achieve? Like, what is your results oriented strategy? Like, what are you trying to get at? Then you get to like make sure that position and messaging work. Then you get to implement like a best in class tech stack. Like, and then you get to like experiment. Then you get to recap and like re-evolve and do that cycle again. But I really think it starts with like, what is that strategy? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve?
And so we've heard some terms, shiny object syndrome in marketing, right? It's a big thing, right? Like there are parts
to it.
Do what?
I said we're all victims of the shiny object syndrome too.
Yeah, there are parts of the process, right, that are fun, that are exciting, the copy lines, the creative, and there are some parts of the pipeline that are not fun and exciting. Like, did you get your landing page right? Were they able to find the information? Were they able to figure out how to book time with you? How do you see that impacting the difference between the shiny ones and the unshiny ones, right? Like, what is your guidance or recommendation to teams when it comes to almost not dropping the ball, right? Like making sure that you really get to the finish line on this stuff.
So it's the balancing act of making sure that, you're not just relying on a tool to do that. Like, even if it's shiny, you still have to make sure that you're conveying the right message, that you're creating that engaging experience for your customer. Like, even on a landing page, like, the goal of that is to convert to leads. So like, you need to make sure that your website's working for you, that your messaging's working. So it's like, how do you not get distracted? It's like, you have to be focused on exactly like, what are those goals that you're trying to achieve.
And when you see companies with marketing and launching different things, I've heard a famous saying, businesses typically don't struggle as much from starvation. They starve from indigestion. They die from indigestion, not starvation, right? Because they're trying to do 1,000 things at once. Do you see that?
I think it's changed. I think that was the case. And that was almost like the blow. Like, you had marketing teams that were 60 people that like, they weren't talking to each other, even though they're all marketing. Unfortunately, I think it's you have to do more with less. And there's one person doing like 3 jobs. And that actually makes it so that when you're talking to different communities, you're actually saying the same thing. So like, say you have, a big launch. Well, you've got the product team involved because you've been talking to them and writing and all of the stuff. You've got, as the marketer, you're the one pulling all the levers because you want it to be successful. I think it used to be across multiple teams, product marketing, product, like comms, and then demand, like all of these teams. And I think now, and it could be the stage that we're at, it's more streamlined. And so there's less of that bloat, and it's more of like, how can we make this efficient, and how can we make sure that like this goes off well, and how do we continue that momentum after?
Very cool. And so this is the part where we start to talk about, so when we see new tech and new innovation, right, in the marketing space, obviously AI is a thing, spoiler alert. And, we always ask folks, right, what tools or technologies or abilities do you see AI bringing to the table that are legit? You're like, no, this is really going to reframe how we're thinking about this. And are there any that you're seeing that you're like, I'm not buying the hype, right? Like, you know what I mean? Or maybe it comes off as one way, but is it like, what are you seeing in the marketing space when it comes to what's real, what's not? What's your take?
What's real and what's not? Okay, so it only takes you so far. I think if you're not embracing AI, if we're not using it as part of your workflow, you're already, it's almost like if you're an early adapter, it's going to make you faster. The thing that I love between the podcast and then I host like a round table of like first marketers, like the first marketers in it to a start. The thing that I'm noticing is like, we're so empowered to use this to shorten the time cycle. Is ChatGPT ever going to write a full blog post? Yes, it could, but is it going to be in the right voice? Is it going to require anything like that? It's never going to be perfect. And I think when you think of your time, it's at least it can give me an outline. At least it can rephrase something. It's never going to replace the actual writing. There are some tools like a Jasper that might take your brand and like start to get there, but it's still going to it eliminates the time and it increases like the speed you can get things done. So think of like even like doing this podcast, that would have been hours of a production and like recording and prep, and now it's let's jump on StreamYard. For us it's Riverside, and like just seems like a casual conversation. Both of these tools are able to then slice, dice it, and make it go out, and like you can take that transcript, put it into another AI tool, create some content that way. It's all to make it so that you're faster. That doesn't necessarily take that strategy away or that thought. And that's where that is my fear. Like it's never going to take it over because it still needs that, like, this is what's real, or this is what gets spit out, but what's real. And that's, I think, the difference. And that's where humans come in. Thank goodness. I also think it is only as good as it knows it. So like, you have to keep at it. You have to keep like teaching it almost so that it gets to your voice. And I think it can only do what it's only at a certain point. We're still like seeing it all. And we're also seeing like a lot of legislation, a lot of cybersecurity, a lot of like, I think the mess that social media has created, especially, we're both moms, like especially thinking about like that. I think AI is, people are aware of some of the dangers that could have, and we're trying to get ahead of it.
So I heard you say a few things. So
Yeah, many things.
deeper. So one was this relationship, right? We see a relationship emerging between AI and HI, right? Human intelligence. And you mentioned like this tool requires management and coaching, right? And criteria and guidance. And we see that even in the AI agents that we build, right? They're meant to just go execute workflows, right? They're not meant to come back every 6 seconds and need help. But the criteria, the making sure you're looking at it and saying, oh, that's what I thought I wanted it to do. But now I realize it, the business has evolved. I know my customer and I need it to do this. How do you coach people to really understand that relationship between that human role and the technology role? You said it a bit, but I'd love to hear a little bit more.
I think that it's not going to replace our jobs. It might take away the mundane tasks. Like I do keep seeing the meme that's out there, like, why can't it take away like the dishes and the laundry? And like, that's what takes up the time. I think it gives you starting points. It doesn't give you finishing points. Like it's still work to be done. I think that humans can embrace it. I think that the use cases are still evolving. You need to have it nowadays because it does help with that speed factor, but I don't think it's going to replace CMOs anytime soon.
Yeah. I think, we talk a lot about, managing AI is going to become a lot more like managing people, right? Like you're going to need to know how to vet those tools and test their capabilities and, again, coach them into a good output. So it's almost like, the roles that we have today, it's almost like, your manager walks in and says, hey, I've hired you a direct report. Now you need to think about managing that. Yes. You are a vice president. You are a marketer. I'm sure, managed a lot of people. What would your coaching be on that?
I mean, it still takes time. So I'm just like, as you manage a person, and it takes time to develop them and train them, and also like let them grow and care about them and make sure that their success is something that you're invested in. It's with the tools. It's also like, what's going to be right for our business, what's going to help it, and how can it fit into my workflow. So that's all time.
Very interesting. Okay, well, we have finally reached towards the end. So we've gotten to talk a lot with you about, starting from the top, right? You said starting with the KPIs, really figuring out your brand voice, making sure your tools are lined up because people want to buy from people. So they should all be focused on creating those people moments that matter. If you were to leave the audience with 3 thoughts or 3 things that you would recommend they go do to, advance their own go-to-market playbook, what would those 3 things be?
I honestly think it comes down to making sure you know your messaging and it's strong and it's exactly what you want to say and where you want to be. It's vision, but it's also like understanding exactly where you sit. And that was a lot of things we talked about, like make sure you know who you are. I think then it goes into consistency and discipline and being able to be known for that. And that is very sometimes lonely to keep going out there and not getting some of the results. But I think that leads to the testing. As long as you're consistent and you are disciplined in doing your marketing, I think that's really where it helps to drive that brand. And that's the last thing. Brand is not like, the last point is go-to-market strategy is also people. And I think that you need to make sure that you're all on the same page. You need to have the same messaging, and people want to buy from people. So you want to make sure that you're also pumping out your own personal brand and tying it back to the business to make sure that you're able to sell what you're selling.
Very cool. All right. Well, Kate, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. We've loved learning from you and appreciate you offering to share some of your playbooks and all of the things that you guys have been working on.
I'm excited to continue the conversation. Thank you so much, Maddie, for all your time.
Absolutely.